Hello and welcome to a special episode of Bridging the Gap. We've got a special guest with us this evening, Chief John Nnia Nwodo, President General of Ohanaeze Ndigbo. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Omeka.
How are you feeling? How are you doing today?
Very well indeed.
Yeah?
Yeah.
How's your stay been so far in London?
Very engaging, intellectually challenging, and refreshing.
This is my colleague. I'll let her introduce herself.
My name is Ogechi. It's nice meeting you, sir.
Same here. Nice meeting you.
Firstly, I just wanted to introduce ICSN and thank you for taking the opportunity to talk to us. I know it's been a hectic schedule for you and we appreciate your time. Firstly, just to introduce our organisation, we're ICSN, a young Igbo organisation of working professionals and students living in the diaspora. And part of our aims is to promote the culture, promote the language and get everybody on the right path of what the Igbo agenda is, and part of that is what your organisation is all about. For those that don't know about Ohanaeze Ndigbo and the history of it, could you please give us a brief history of it along with your introduction of yourself, please?
Well, Ohanaeze was founded at the end of the Nigerian Civil War in 1970. It was an attempt to rally our people together in a socio-cultural organization. In the absence of political parties, then we were under a military regime of General Gowan, and we needed to have a socio-cultural organization that could speak for our people and make representations on our behalf to government. The need for this organization became more and more important as the years progressed, and it came to become a serious umbrella organization for all Igbo organizations. About 20 years or so ago, we began to talk about writing a constitution for Ohanaeze. And we wrote a constitution. I was the chairman of the Constitution Drafting Committee. The highlights of this constitution, apart from the objectives that I have enunciated to you, was to rotate the headship of Ohanaeze amongst the Igbo states in Nigeria in an alphabetical order. Now, it's very difficult to ask someone to introduce himself. My name is John Nwodo. Yeah. I come from Ukehe in Iboetiti local government area of Enugu State. I was born to Josephine, my mother, and John Nwodo. 64 years ago. I will be 65 in a few months in December.
What are your roles and responsibilities as the President General of Ohanaeze Ndigbo?
Well, my role is to advance the cause of our people in the various objective areas of Ohanaeze, promote our culture, promote our way of life, promote development in our areas, have a robust representation of our people in public discourse about policy issues in our country, and help our people in government and in the legislature to have a linkage with the leadership of our citizenry. This, of course, means that sometimes we have to do advocacy on the international plane. Yeah. I also I'm sized with the responsibility of ensuring that Igbos in other parts of Nigeria live in peace with their hosts and have security. I also tour the diaspora to meet with Igbos in diaspora to acquaint them of trends at home and encourage them to live out our culture.
Touching on that, particularly culture, the youth of recent are now getting more involved in being part of the culture, and as your role, are you being effective in delivering that?
I think I would be unfair to myself to be a judge of what I am doing. But we have set up organs that should promote our objectives. Ohanaeze has standing committees, and one of the standing committees is a planning and strategy committee. And this committee has several subcommittees dealing with several aspects of our challenges. We also organize an Igbo Day once a year on the 29th of September. This year's own has been cancelled because of the extant political problems, which will make it difficult for our people in northern Nigeria to effectively participate in it. During that Igbo Day, we promote our culture. Each of the 7 states that belong to Ohanaeze showcase their culture in dances, in cultural displays, in cultural crafts, paintings, in recitations, in music, and there is a competition. We also take the opportunity to invite our people in the diaspora to come and be part of this celebration. We rotate it amongst the 7 states so that each state has an opportunity to host it.
Some of my observations of being part of ICSN and being closer to pushing the Igbo agenda forward is also noting some of the divisions within our people. And I wanted to know, what challenges do you face in your position on a day-to-day basis?
We're very Republican people.
Yeah.
And being Republican, we are very assertive.
Yeah.
And we are very competitive. And we don't only compete in status, we compete for superiority of ideas. And there's a streak of megalomania in it. And you must know that throughout history, this is the first time in a generation you have people of ages between 18 and 40 who are very well educated and sometimes jobless. When I went to primary school, many of my age mates could not go to primary school. They were farmers, or they had no access to a good school. When I went to secondary school, it was more expensive. It was £60 a term. And only very few parents could afford it for their children. And so a number of people stopped at the primary school and went on to work or farm.
Yeah.
But right now, education is basically subsidized. And primary education is almost free for everyone. And it's easily affordable. Secondary school education has also increased exponentially.
Yeah.
And so now you have a youth that is very informed. If you factor in technology and the speed with which information is disseminated, people are very well informed, and disputation becomes inevitable. And in the olden days, we were allowed to speak up and dramatize our differences, but culture enjoined us to respect the last word of the eldest person in the family, whether he was right or wrong. You postponed your appeal for another day.
Yeah.
But he had also a corresponding duty to listen to everyone.
I guess that brings me to the current affairs of today, and which is, like you've mentioned before, in regards to the battle between logic and reasoning, and people reacting with emotions to some of the issues that we're facing today. And one of those particular issues is about the quit notice that was given to the Igbos in the north. How did Ohanaeze react to that notice?
We condemned it.
Okay.
We thought it was an affront on our fundamental human rights. Our constitution guarantees that every Nigerian enjoys citizenship of Nigeria, irrespective of where you come from.
Mm-hmm.
So you can live anywhere in Nigeria and pursue your business anywhere in Nigeria. Yeah. You do not need permission from anyone to live anywhere you wanted to. And our people are very enterprising people, and they're very commercial people. So they have dispersed like the mustard seed, and they are everywhere in Nigeria.
Yeah.
Consequently, there is no part of Nigeria where you do not find an Igbo man. And there's no part of Nigeria where, if you took a census of the ethnic configuration of the people who were there, apart from the indigenous group, the second largest group would almost certainly be the Igbo man. And because of that, we are very highly exposed in northern Nigeria.
Yeah.
We are also heavily invested in northern Nigeria. At my last count, we had 11.6 million Igbos in northern Nigeria. And
is that a fundamental flaw for the Igbo man in regards to why we invested so heavily up north and not back in the south, in the southeast?
Well, to begin with, in terms of land area, we have very limited land area in comparison to northern Nigeria. So naturally, there would be a migrational tendency.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, commerce is accentuated by a wide market. If we all stayed at home and sold and bought from ourselves, we would never expand economically. So the tendency was for our people to go out and expand their market. And that they have done very successfully.
Given that has happened, there have been on numerous occasions where the Igbos in the north have been killed. So what's your take on Ohanaeze for the families that, because most of the time those families, their names are not revealed, so it's kind of like they've been forgotten in a way. They're just people, Igbos were killed in this state, Igbo was killed in this northern state. So what does Ohanaeze do to tackle that kind of?
Well, we have made representations to the presidency. We have made public advocacy of the duplicity of standards in terms of protecting our lives and property. We have engaged the law actively in each case where there have been this lynching and killing. Yeah. And I enumerated about 15 cases in one of my interviews on channel television. Mm. We have used Ohanaeze organs in those states to encourage suits so that the people who did this can be brought to book so that it will never happen again. In truth, there's been a reduction of those incidences in recent times.
That's because what really bothers me is it's like we talk about the rule of law within a country, and I feel like that doesn't exist in Nigeria, especially when blood is shed. There are people who are nameless. Once people have died, you just hear this amount of people were killed, and people become desensitized from it because you're not identifying with any pictures, you're not identifying with any particular names, and so naturally, somewhere, somebody's lost their son or their daughters, but we don't know the full extent of that. How can we move from a position, because when we do this, we always talk about marginalization. How do we move from that narrative to now being a position of strength when it comes to negotiating with the people who essentially run our lives?
Well, we're already doing that now, and that's why I've gone to the point of the presidency to articulate our grievances and to give specific data, names, places where people were killed. And I did so to the acting president of Nigeria in front of the Inspector General of Police and all the service chiefs in the armed forces and the Minister of Internal Affairs as well as the Minister of Defense. You couldn't go higher.
Yeah.
So advocacy for this matter has been unrelenting. It has reached the highest apex of authority. Our legal advisor is a senior advocate of Nigeria, and is coordinating cases in the various branches of Ohanaeze where there have been cases of this nature. Sadly, in some of the cases, the victims have had private settlement with the governments and those the accused persons in those areas, making it impossible for us to carry on with the matter any further. But what has been brought on the front burner is the fact we can't take this anymore.
Yeah.
Yes.
Only recently, the Operation Python dance regurgitated all this once again.
Yeah.
And the pictures that tread in the social media are disappointing. They are alarming, they are provocative, but we have also engaged the military authorities, and they have promised to carry out an extensive investigation. I can assure you that if the investigations are not satisfactory, we are also going to go to the courts to seek justice.
These are the same courts that are branding unarmed groups as terrorists. How can we trust this system when people are not held to account, when you're bringing evidence that these are people that are dying? You know, this is murder, but no one is being put in prison. Nobody, you know, and somewhere these families are not getting justice. And so this is my theory in regards to how these acts continue to breed hate amongst people. When people talk about small children who have lost their parents because of a terrorist organization, that young child who lived through that terror grows up hating who he believes killed his family. You know, and you can't take that away. You can't separate that. So how do we now move forward and hold these people to account if the highest office doesn't respect the evidence that you're putting on the table?
This is why we're advocating restructuring of the Federation. The government is too far from the people. The government has also been militarized.
Yes.
Yes.
Consequently, under our civil democracy, we only have had Shehu Shagari, Yaradua, and Jonathan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The rest has been militarized. If you look at a list of presidents in Nigeria since the end of the Civil War, there's been a preponderance of military people, either in civilian clothes or in military governments. The command and control structure of the military does not allow them to reflect democracy as an ethos in a style of rulership. And unfortunately, we've been weeded away from the commanding heights of the Nigerian military. So people from our side of the country never get to the point of becoming a military head of state. And it has been a continuous engagement, a continuous advocacy of our displeasure at the current state of affairs. I bet you it requires a lot of patience.
It does, and it's my thing is this, like, just to use an example of a man trying to court a woman, and if she's not interested, she can string this man along for however long she wants, just to appease them by saying, yeah, I'll just call me whenever you want. So that's what I feel like the government are doing. We continue to advocate, and to talk, but essentially we don't have what can we do apart from the advocacy?
Because it's like a continuous cat and mouse game going back and forth. You put a negotiation on the table and nothing happens. And advocacy, there's only so much advocacy and engagement can do. So as an acting general of Ohanaeze, what can Ndigbo actually do about this situation?
This is why we are advocating for the restructuring of the Federation. When we restructure, the federating unit will have a lot more powers, and the federal government will have less powers. Every politics is local. You know, the more your county council has powers, the more you feel the impact of governance. Your streets are paved, your drainage is working, your waste is disposed punctually. when the city of London has to take care of what happens in a remote part of Hendon or Finchley, without a local authority for Hendon or Finchley, government becomes too distant, ineffective, inefficient, and therefore unable to satisfy the yearnings of the people. This is the position in Nigeria. The federal government has appropriated to itself too much powers. I mean, the federal government has gubernatorial intervention in education, in health, in roads, in environment and sanitation. These are local issues.
Yeah, I agree.
It has no business to do anything with that. The federal government should be interested in defense. It should be interested in external affairs, immigration, customs, and currency control. And that's why we are all routing for a restructuring of the federation into federating units, as states or regions or both, so that the people will take their own governance in their own hands and deal with their local problems in their own way and promote efficiency and distinction as best they can.
I guess the other side of the argument from that restructuring is the self-determination of Biafra. I'm sure you're aware it's a global movement, especially with IPOB in particular being the movement that a lot of people are now throwing their weight behind, especially with Nnamdi Kanu, and since he was released from prison, and his current tour of the states, the southeastern states. So what's your thoughts on that particular agitation? And when we talk about dialogue, it's important to understand each other, where each other are coming from. So do you understand where they're coming from, or what's your opinion on their plight?
I perfectly do. I mean, they are dramatizing the discrimination against our people, our marginalization, and our complete and abject rejection of this attitude. The future of our children is compromised by the way the federal government is treating us. I felt exactly the same way in 1966. I wore a badge, Easterners Get Red. I got recruited into the Biafran army. I fought the war. Yeah. We lost 3.5 million people in the war. We lost some in warfare, we lost some in air raids, we lost some in starvation. We lost some who were young children of less than 1 year who were air freighted to neighboring West African countries, undocumented, whom we cannot reach now. Now, we failed to get Biafra. We were routed in war. We are not about to prosecute another war. We do not have the logistics for it. It is not even desirable to wage war twice in a generation. The IPOB's weapon for Biafra is demand for a referendum.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very brilliant idea. But you know, what is the workability of this demand? It is realizable in my view, but it will take a long time to realize, because it's in the field of diplomacy. You have to, first of all, understand that under our constitution in Nigeria, there's no provision for referendum. You can only get referendum through the route of the African Union Charter or the UN Charter. Mm. And you will need a resolution of the General Assembly of either body to be able to get a referendum conducted in your country. Now, it requires lobby of member nations. The AU is almost dead on arrival because many of the member countries there are reluctant to promote self-determination. Mm. And history bears me out in this. I mean, in Morocco, they've been asking for a Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic since 1998 or before. It's gone over for 20 years now. And there's been no resolution on this subject. In Cameroon, since we got independence and Southern Cameroon joined Cameroon, they've always wanted to be a separate state. And they have not been able to get it. Now, in Sudan and Ethiopia versus Eritrea, they have been able to get separate countries, but even Eritrea still travels with Ethiopian passport. Northern and Southern Sudan are still after each other, and even within Southern Sudan, there are internal conflicts. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that even if we succeed in garnering a number of countries to give resolution for a referendum, we will also need a domestic enactment of that resolution in the Nigerian parliament. And we will also need a financial provision by our national parliament to organize a referendum. Britain wouldn't have had bricked exit if the House of Commons did not pass a resolution for the referendum. So even if in the European Union level you got an approval to go if you want to go, they needed a referendum here to authorize them to go. And they needed a resolution of parliament to empower a referendum. And they needed an act of parliament to appropriate money for the conduct of the referendum. This is an inevitable process, which under our present arrangement is tortuous, likely to be long, and in the short term, the most pragmatic thing to do is to seek restructuring. When you compare the end product of restructuring and the end product of Biafra, you are in a position to make a conclusion for yourself as to which is best. In a restructured Nigeria, the southeastern Nigeria will be a region. It will be an independent region with exclusive responsibility for education. You will need to sit for JAMB. You will need to sit for the universities there directly. It will have exclusive responsibility for mineral resources in its area, for its management. It will have exclusive responsibility for environment, for infrastructural development, land, sea, and air. And the federal government will have nothing to do with these basic utility things of a daily basis. And it will have responsibility for domestic security. In other words, the local police will be the state police and the regional police. And the federal police will only come to the regions if there is a transgression of a federal offense. And the federal offense has to be limited to the federal responsibilities of immigration, of customs, of currency, of terror in terms of external defense. So wherein comes the ubiquitous intervention that we have now by the federal government in our everyday life? In every structured federation, the federal government has nothing to do with us except on invitation by the region or state, as the case may be. So that domestic autonomy that Biafra seeks, you already have it. The only thing you lose is that the ambassadors have to come from every part of Nigeria. Nigeria has to have one passport. You have to have a central army to deal with external aggression. You have to have one currency in order to promote commerce in the whole country, like the United States has. And the jury is still out amongst our business class whether a restructured Nigeria does not promote their business better than a Biafra. A Biafra will leave you in a landlocked area of the southeast with no access to sea, although we're trying to build a seaport in Ogbako now, in Abia State. Biafra would leave you with the requirement to get a visa to move from Aba to Port Harcourt. You would need a visa to move from Onitsha to Asaba. Delta State, under an Igbo governor, has said that they are not part of Biafra. So it means that you would require a visa to cross the river Niger. I come from Osuka. I will require a visa to go to Orokrami, to just Otukbo next door. I mean, I have a friend called Steve Lawani, who lives in Okpadikbo local government, which is about 35 minutes from my home. And they have very good palm wine. And during the Christmas, I used to drive to him and Chris Garba, Governor Chris Garba. I used to drive to them to drink palm wine. Now I will need a visa to do a 35-minute journey there. Now, it also means that all the traders in Onitsha who sell their wares in Makurudi, in Jos, in Maiduguri, in Adamawa, and in Yobe, and in Kaduna and Kano would need visas for every major trip that they go there. We will have to pay import duties to bring things from the north and to take things to the north. So if you land your goods in Benue State, 1 hour away from Igbo land, you will pay duties for bringing it into another country.
It's interesting. Sorry, you talk about I guess the negatives of that. What would be the positive, for instance, of an independent state of Biafra, for instance? Because you've given us some of the negatives, just to balance the views, I guess.
In the light of these positives, I do not know whether there are positives that will overwhelm them. That's why I say the jury is still out as to which is best for us.
But don't you think, because
the only advantage, perhaps, is that all the mineral resources we have, we will have 100% of that accruing to us as revenue, instead of retaining 50% in the states, giving the regions 35%, and giving the federal government 15%.
Okay. But in regards to the referendum, I know that Spain and Catalonia, they're asking for a referendum. There's a set date in October. And Iraq and Kurdistan are also holding a referendum. Don't you think that as someone that's in a position of power like President Buhari should listen to Nigerian citizens, including Ndigbo, to hold a referendum so that it puts an end to, in a sense, the agitation, so that he's being free and fair for all?
If they were listening to us, we wouldn't have had this problem.
It's true.
The history of our constitution is the history of our war.
Yeah.
Since the end of the war in 1970, the constitutions that we've had were written by the people who defeated us in the war.
Yeah.
And they constructed a National Assembly that gave them a Pyrrhic majority. So under no circumstances will they be prepared to shed their power. And they said that last week. It will only take a war to make them shed their power. It will really take an international conspiracy of all the countries of the world to force them into shedding their power.
But that's
you know that how long that took in Myanmar. Now, I don't know how long we would wait for that. So in this circumstance, we have to adopt a strategy that fights both ways.
What about the restructuring? Some would say that discourse has been going on for so long as well. What if restructure never happens? What are we left with next? What's the next move?
I don't know what the next move will be. It will be almost suicidal to lose self-determination and lose restructuring. And we've been in that state for a very long time.
So with the current setup, doesn't it favor the North? Isn't it in their interest to keep the status quo? So why would they be motivated to now want to give us what's in our interest?
Because right now, it is not just the Igbos asking for Biafra. It is the entire southern Nigeria asking for restructuring, joined by the Middle Belt. So the upper north is in a minority. And can you imagine for one moment if in 2019 the entire southern Nigeria, as well as the Middle Belt, boycotted elections in Nigeria? Nigeria will disappear because there will be no National Assembly, there will be no president, and we'll be forced to go to a negotiating table. You understand what I mean? Yeah. But if you kept on saying you wanted a referendum and they frustrated you, What is your second option? War. I'd be a saboteur if you went to war. I wouldn't have a war again. I wouldn't expose our children to war a second time.
Some would say that they're already in war because they've lost people on the ground, especially some of the IPOB youths who are very angry. Once you've lost somebody, like we say, we're here, we feel not detached as per se, because again, there are no names associated with the people that have died. All you hear is this amount of people that have died.
Unfortunately, those people don't know what a war is. That's not war.
Yeah, but losing somebody, it's still that there's still that loss of life, and so whatever grievance, the conversation at the start might have been about marginalization, but now you've made it their reality by killing their brother, their cousin, their father, and now that hatred continues to grow for the state of Nigeria. How do you engage those young people?
Let's not go into the issues of who's been killed and who's not been killed. For national security reasons, okay, I would not want to go into it, because every part of Nigeria is bleeding from this crisis. And I don't think it's important to go into it. But that's not war. We have lost lives, all right. We have lost lives, perhaps on all sides. And every life is important.
I guess to reframe it, how would we
just 1 second, but it's not the same thing as a war.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing as a war.
Yeah.
When there's a full-blown war, civilian targets are bombed, strapped. Children, women who have nothing to do with the war are decimated. Economic blockades are done on all sea routes as they were done into Biafra. And it was only possible to fly in food and arms into one airstrip. That airstrip was bombed every week. It was retarded every night. And out of 3 aircrafts that came in there, only 2 probably landed. 1 was blown up in the air. You have no idea what war means. So you can't say that because there's been skirmishes with soldiers in which we've lost very dear lives, that they might as well say that some have been killed. It is nothing comparable to war.
Yeah.
And no father who is sensible would wish this on his children.
How do we bring those people who are feeling a sense of loss to the table to understand your vision? Because as we know that there are so many conflicted views.
You know, in Igbo land, there's always this impatience for discussion and engagement.
Yeah.
The world is not London. I don't like that. There's nothing dramatic about agreements. There is continuous discussion until people give their strongly held values, you know, until it becomes clear which one is doable and which one is tenable. This discussion has to go on.
Yeah. So I know in the Ahiara Declaration, Ojukwu wrote about sustainable development in the East in aspects to culture, police force, education, healthcare, which is fundamental to any society. As your role in Ohanaeze, and do you work alongside with the Southeast governors to ensure, you know, sustainable things can happen in the East? Because, you know, the way the funding is budgeted, the Southeast doesn't get much.
If you had done some background work before this interview, you would have found that these questions are already answered. When I inaugurated the Planning and Strategy Committee of Chuma Soludo, the former governor of Central Bank, which is the standing committee of Ohanaeze, I enunciated the goals. I wanted a regional economic integration, and I gave the terms of reference. We want a rail line that integrates the whole of the Southeast. We wanted the planting of 1 million palm trees in each of the Igbo states annually. And you know that we were the largest exporter of palm produce in the world until we sold our seedlings to Malaysia. Now, we wanted palm produce within the next 10 years to be able to give us external revenue equal to oil revenue. We wanted the growth of technological institutions in Igbo land. Not too many, because if you want to achieve quality, there have to be few, because of equipment, manpower, resources. You know that the Massachusetts Institute of Technology is being displaced by one in India, which is producing some of the CEOs in the United States of America. So technological education is so critical to development now. And this is part of the terms of reference of the Soludo Committee. You know, now our governors right now are meeting with governors of the South-South region with a view to taking over federal roads that link each of our states. If you drive from Aba to Port Harcourt today, it's a nightmare. Yeah. So these governors have reached a resolution that if the federal government doesn't want to help us, fine. Let's begin to do something in each of these places. Let's divide these roads according to the states, and let each state in one financial year do at least 10 miles of this road, and do it in a solid manner so that our people can. Power, we are sized with a common representation to the federal government. Only 9% of power generated in the Federal Republic of Nigeria is allocated to the Southeast. And yet, Anambra State, for instance, has the highest growth of small-scale industries in the whole of the Federation. It has the lowest poverty index. That shows you the capacity of our self-help without government assistance. You know, our reservoir of potential is gargantuan.
In regards to the governors, and coming from a place where if we were more united as one, or if, for instance, with the views of the IPOB, with the views of Ohanaeze, and working with the governors, if all these people were singing off the same hymn sheet, don't you think that would be will carry more weight in regards to when you're going towards the federal government to try and get essentially what we all want, which is the same goal?
Well, there's no doubt that the Ohanaeze and Southeast governors and our leaders in the National Assembly are working together in spite of daily differences, in spite of clash of personalities amongst us. But you know, there comes a time when you write roughshod of these differences and pursue common goals. Yeah. I have tried to factor IPOB into it, but IPOB is operating from a standpoint of lack of confidence in the existing leadership. Yeah. I am a subject of news talks on Radio Biafra. They've called me a murderer. Oh, they have called me a compromised man. They have accused me of having received large sums of money from the federal government that has collateralized my conscience and prevented me from seeing the validity of their own point of view. Notwithstanding this, I've invited them to meetings, and we reached agreements which were breached within 1 week of these agreements. And after there was an attack in Ozobolo, they claimed that I occasioned the attack by not presenting a common united Igbo front. Notwithstanding this, when the Attorney General came after the IPOB leader, I went after the Attorney General. When they described them as a terrorist organization, I came out in defense of them because they are my children. The first speech I made on inauguration as President General for Ohanaeze, I called for the release of Nnamdi Kanu. I said he was my son, and I said his struggle was my struggle. As member of Nzuko Umona, I participated in putting a delegation to go and see him in detention. As President General of Ohanaeze, I offered him our legal advice and a legal team to defend him. He turned it down. There's a limit to which I can take responsibility for some of his actions that I do not agree with. And my father once told me, son, if I ask you not to do something, it is either that it is not good enough for you, or you have not succeeded in convincing me that it is good enough for you. Nobody brings forth a child and hates his own child. A child must have respect for the father to drink from the ocean of the father's wisdom. If the child feels he knows it all and you've tried to restrain him, it becomes difficult how to forge the kind of unity you're asking me.
And just to come to a conclusion, where we have so many passionate young Igbos in the diaspora, what advice would you give us in regards to how we can stay engaged and get involved, and what we can do from here to further our cause?
One of the things that I find disappointing, and mark you, it also affects me with some of my children who are studying abroad, is the loss of local language and culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think your parents are responsible for this.
Yeah.
So for the youth, I expect this. Two, if you can save to go on holidays to America, you must save to come on holidays to Igbo land.
Yeah.
You have to know where you come from before you can behave like where you come from. You have to understand your cultural habits and your lineage and what have you before it becomes part of your thinking. Look, I think in Igbo and speak in English because it was the first language that I spoke. You have to also become engaged in local politics. When I was disputing with Nnamdi Kanu as to whether there should be an election in Anambra or not, I said, why don't you raise a political party or adopt an existing one and field candidates so that they reflect your ideology? You know, you must find some other way to do this so that you can begin gradually to sell your point of view. Now, I believe that the young people in Igbo land are not ambitious enough. I became special assistant to the president at the age of 28. I became minister at 31. And I see people doing the same thing here. Why are you guys so laid back that you can't even come home and run for councillor in your ward? Your knowledge is like a Taj Mahal in Islam.
Thank you very much for the interview. I think it's been very insightful for us. And then again, we appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for
Thank you. Nice to have you.